Hello and welcome to Moneylife. We're talking about Franklin Templeton Mutual Fund again today. About a year ago, on April 23rd last year to be precise, Franklin just shut down 6 debt schemes which had assets under management of anywhere between 25 and 30,000 crore. Now, what is the latest on it? All of you who followed this video blog know that there's been a long battle going on. Some money has been paid back to investors. Investor activists have been in court, to the Karnataka High Court and then the Supreme Court to get justice. Justice is nowhere in sight really for investors who've lost their money. They're getting a part of the money back and there's a big question mark over the rest of it. But guess what Franklin Templeton has done? It is worried that it's going to be slapped with hefty penalties, and even before anything is in the public, not even the forensic report ordered by the Securities and Exchange Board of India, which our wonderful capital market regulator continues to hide from the public, even before that is out, even before details of the show cause notice it has apparently served Franklin Templeton are out in the public domain, it is using diplomatic channels and writing that if it does not get a just and fair hearing, imagine that, just and fair hearing to an extremely profitable international fund, Franklin Templeton, which has been spending money in its asset management company, literally investors' money. Investors are spending their own money to fight it. It is wanting a just and fair hearing, and it also says that if disgorgement of revenues is very steep, we don't know what is steep according to it, whether it's going to be happy with 2 crores or a few lakhs, or what does it think is a steep penalty. But if the penalty is too steep, then it threatens that it may pull out of the country. This will look very bad for India, it says, and it points out that several foreign funds have already left the country. It's a wonderful allegation that's worth looking at, and people like me who've been covering business for over 35 years have a long memory. So we can go back to 1984 when US companies have used diplomatic channels and arm twisted our government to go soft on them, and ridiculously enough our governments have compromised, have been swayed, and have always been against us. So going back to the Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984, you remember we just let Union Carbide get away with a pathetic little compensation. People suffered, 15,000 people died. There are millions of others who suffered lifelong ailments and got nothing. And this is a pattern. After that, within 6 years, you had India almost defaulting on its foreign exchange obligations. We had a bailout from the World Bank, and then the arm twisting started even more because the economy was opening up. We were under pressure from the World Bank, and foreign companies were just being let in because we were moving from an insular economy to opening up. They were coming here and again arm twisting us. The first thing that happened at that time was the big security scam, which is known as Harshad Mehta scam. Foreign banks were equally involved in it. Citibank was one of them, and amazingly enough, a senior Citi executive had actually had the temerity to say that RBI guidelines at that time, which all banks, including the foreign banks, were merrily flouting, were just that, guidelines. They were not the law of the land, which means the bank did not need to adhere to them as long as it could find brokers to act as fronts. It got away with a small penalty because India was seen as a corrupt country, bankrupt nation, desperate for foreign exchange, and we were desperate for foreign exchange. So apart from a few country heads having to move out, many of them with a golden handshake, nothing happened because global pressure worked. The other thing that happened right around that time was the infamous Enron Inc. Enron with a crooked E as its logo has collapsed. Global collapse, embarrassed the US. But for almost 10 years before it actually blew up, it was here in India, corrupting everybody, influencing policy, getting a sovereign guarantee on extremely high returns on the Dabhol Power Company that was set up here in Maharashtra. It was so corrupt, there was opposition, the contract was cancelled and then re-signed. When it was cancelled, the pressure was extraordinary. Enron did not hesitate to use its links with the George Bush government, and it turned out that Kenneth Lay, its then chairman, who then spent time in jail, had actually been a big funder of the Bush campaign. And so two ambassadors in India, Frank Wisner and Robert Blackwell, had absolutely no hesitation lecturing the Indian government, telling them that nobody would want to do business with India, how bad we would look as a country. And guess what? Frank Wisner actually went and joined the Enron board afterwards. So much for Chinese walls and separation of interests. But it is a pattern that US companies, the minute they are in trouble, and it hasn't stopped there. There was Deloitte recently, and don't forget that it's not a question of just arm twisting them and getting rid of corrupt project. We continue, because Enron was the template and the benchmark on which all independent power producers were based, even if their deals were not as gold-plated as Enron. We Indians are paying the price for it 30 years later, because our power tariffs remain obscenely high, and we are only paying for this legacy of dubious projects that were set up at that time, and there is no way to straighten things out. And Dabhol Power Company, where on earth is it? It was dumped into the Arabian Sea. What is important to remember is, doesn't matter which political formation, it was again a BJP Sena government that revived the Dabhol Power Company at 3 times the size, and it just did not work, because as many of us had been writing those days, the economics was all wrong and nobody would listen. So you had Enron. Next big one around that time was Morgan Stanley Mutual Fund. I mean, guess what? Somebody said Franklin Templeton is one of the pioneers. No, it wasn't. It was Morgan Stanley, and everything that Morgan Stanley did in India was rather shady. So it was the first offshore fund tied up with State Bank of India as a joint venture. State Bank of India was the major partner, with Morgan Stanley as a junior partner. When the first conflict came out, there's a lot of fanfare about this joint venture. When the first time they disagreed on investments, Morgan Stanley pointed to the fine print, which said that it had the veto powers. It had slipped it into the contract, and our people at SBI Mutual Fund hadn't noticed. I don't know what kind of lawyers we have, whether it was deliberate, whether they deliberately were induced to turn a blind eye. The fact is, it was noticed then. Once it was out in the open, the relationship soured and it broke up. Then Morgan Stanley came back with its own standalone fund. It was the first foreign mutual fund in India. And it was hyped and missold so much even before its launch that, believe it or not, today we have so many people investing in mutual funds. So all of you know that your 10 rupees has got to be invested and make money for you. At that time, it pretended that investment will be accepted on a first come first served basis, so much so that there was a grey market. The 10 rupee units were selling at a premium, and the day the issue opened, people stood in long queues in pouring rain to give 1,000 crore. I'm talking about 1,000 crore in the early 90s, which is a lot of money. And what happened? Far from a performance that made this 1,000 crore into 3,000 crore as was expected, it just performed so badly, made the wrong investments, its NAV fell below par and remained like this. The public was so angry with Morgan Stanley that it didn't dare to come up with another scheme for almost a decade. And after hobbling around in India with a bad performance, it finally exited. So let's not talk about how well you do because you're a foreign mutual fund. Yes, it is true that a lot of others came, but before we come to them, let's look at how Morgan Stanley behaved. And you see shades of it in Franklin Templeton, and that's why it's worth remembering. Devashish Basu, who's the editor of Moneylife, wrote in his book Face Value in 2003 about how it performed, saying, over the next few years, Morgan changed several fund managers amid whispers of their arrogance, wrongdoing, and nexus with brokers. We covered it at that time. He also wrote, one Morgan fund manager was rumored to have got the broker research reports piled up on his desk, called his secretary, and with a wide swipe of a wooden stick flung the reports at the ground because he wanted his secretary to treat broker research reports with that kind of disdain. Unfortunately, many of the stocks in Morgan's portfolio were part of the garbage that comes to the surface in a frothy market. And between 97 and 2000, despite desperately revamping its portfolio, Morgan Stanley delivered, guess what, 3% return on its 20-year fund. It never regained investors' trust, and which was lost because of its arrogant, hyped-up entry and poor performance. In 2014, it finally sold to HDFC Mutual Fund. Now, our editor, you can go to Moneylife's website and look at it. Devashish has also written about the performance of Morgan Stanley. He's written about the performance of Franklin Templeton, and while it's threatening to withdraw, he's pointed out how much of money has been pulled out. Let's look at the funds that have walked out. So it's not just foreign funds, it's a question of survival of the fittest. It is, yes, foreign funds have walked out, but so have Indian mutual funds. They have closed down for various reasons. So in 2015, Reliance Capital acquired Goldman Sachs Mutual Fund, which went out of the country. At that time, Fidelity was acquired by L&T, Daiwa, ING, PineBridge, and I talked about Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Mutual Fund, have all quit India. But so many other Indian funds, Sahara Mutual Fund, Cholamandalam, IDFC, Reliance itself, which, acquired one fund, then did badly and was acquired by Nippon. So it's basically survival of the fittest. In fact, after Fidelity walked out because they could take the heat or didn't think the business will grow, or that their model of high front-end commissions to distributors would work, they have lost out. Because look at how the mutual fund industry has done. Thanks to falling interest rates, real estate prices being too high, and you earning very little on bank deposits, people have started investing in a big way in mutual funds, and there has been a raging bull market for a long time. So the Indian mutual fund industry just from 2015 has grown 2.5 times. So assets under management have grown from 13 lakh crore in 2015 to 32 lakh crore at the end of February. Who's the loser? If Franklin Templeton wants to go tomorrow, there are lots and lots of people waiting to buy them, and these, believe it or not, are Indian funds who are investing Indian money. Franklin has been making so much of money on fund management as compared to the tiny amount that it brought in. If it thinks it can get away with arm twisting, I don't think it's going to work here. Let's see how our government reacts. Will it stand up? Will it show it the door? Will it read it the Riot Act? And for heaven's sake, will SEBI make that forensic audit report public and tell us what Franklin has been doing? Because what we know from leaks in the media is that they have been front running. There were warnings by the risk management department. Everything has been suppressed from 2019. We need to know, we need to punish them, and I think let's decide what disgorgement is okay by our standards. Thank you. If you like hearing what we said, please subscribe to our news channel and please spread the word. Thanks.